So let's talk about some of the illustrations for this book. Unfortunately, I lost the sketching stage of this one, but how I went through and planned this one out was initially I built the bar in SketchUp, just real quick and simple. Then I used the Design Doll program to create the posing of all the characters, kind of figure out where I wanted everybody. And there was a lot of kind of back and forth and really fine adjusting to be able to get the composition I want and have it focused on the characters I want. This is the illustration from chapter 1, so it's the introductory illustration, and it's really important for kind of setting the mood of a lot of different things. So I had it's really focused on Shiloh, who is sitting on the couch with his knee up, and then we have Akita at the table in the back corner. We have a couple other characters in there, Theo at the table with Akita, and Dayu at a table of her own, and then a couple unnamed characters on the couch because you can't really see them. They're just there for compositional purposes. And then one thing I really struggled with when I got to the inking stage of this illustration specifically was that I have never quite found inking brushes that I actually like. An issue I ran into all the time with inking brushes is that they wouldn't have the amount of solid blacks I wanted. They would be a mix of blacks and grays, or they'd be kind of fuzzy or things like that, and they just wouldn't give me the feel I wanted, or they wouldn't have the right amount of roughness so that they looked a little more natural compared to just a hard digital look that you would normally get. But for this project, I finally found like my dream inking brush set, and it works in both Photoshop and Procreate, which is absolutely fantastic. So I can, jump back and forth really easily as I need to. This Timelapse specifically is from Procreate. It's where I've done the majority of the illustrations for this book. But that brush set is the Rusty Quill brush set. It's absolutely phenomenal. Look it up. It is so worth the money. It has so many great inking and detailing brushes. It has great watercolor wash brushes. It has great texture brushes. Just absolutely phenomenal. I'm so in love with it. I have used it on way more than just the illustrations for this book ever since. Love it. Cannot, speak to it enough. So once I've got all the inks laid down, I go in and I start blocking in the really big black shadows and kind of playing with where I want the light. This is kind of a dim, dingy saloon. Really their only light is that gas lamp on the wall. Probably, a couple other little gas lamps around, but they are in a very dark corner of the bar, so there is going to be a lot more shadows, a lot more harsh contrast in here than there might necessarily be anywhere else. This is when I was using the brush set for the first time, so there's a lot of experimenting you can see in this time lapse with me trying to figure out how to work with this brush set and figure out how to get the look I want and the effects I want. I've done a lot of pen and ink illustration before, a lot of digital pen and ink illustration before, so I have the basics of how I work figured out. I know I like the look of adding some white lines against the black, having, some rougher textures and things like that. It was just a matter of figuring out how to do that with the brushes I want and kind of let those brushes do some of the work for me while I, still have it in my style and make it my own kind of thing. So it's just continuing to block in more and more of those blacks, figuring out, where the biggest shadows are going to lay. I was really fond of the cross-hatching brushes that they have in here. They just weren't quite working, so I tried more of a watercolor wash. Still wasn't quite doing what I wanted. And then I found this fantastic, just really gritty texture brush in the brush set, and just immediately fell in love with it. Worked back and forth with erasing and painting to get the level of texture I wanted with it. Then for that wallpaper you just saw me do, I actually created the pattern in a separate file and used the Rusty Nib set to kind of modify it slightly to have a little more texture and then brought it in and put it into the illustration itself. And then it's not all about lighting, you know, I'm also establishing this wood texture on the walls to give that a little more life. And just playing back and forth with adding and erasing texture so that I can create the look I want, but also, you know, lead the eye around in the proper way, have the focus go where I want it to go. You know, I want you focused on Shiloh and Akita. They are the two main characters visible in this illustration. So they're who you need to be looking at more than anything else. So I've got the most light playing on the two of them. I have contrast in the level of texture both on them and around them to help draw the eye into those two characters. I've also got a lot of lines leading to and from them, like the lines on the floor all pointing to them, the lines on the wall all pointing to them. And as I go and I establish this more texture and figure out the lighting more and more, I start to figure out, okay, I need a little bit more black here. Okay, wait, I need to do front of the couch a little more black, the stool a little more black, these feet a little more black. And I just keep slowly building up. And that's the biggest advantage of doing digital pen and ink illustration, is that I can erase and I can try again if something doesn't look quite right. Which is good for a project like this where I've got a vague idea of what I want and what I'm going for, but it's vague. It's vague. I was experimenting so much because I did really want this kind of vintagey feel to it, you know, a little bit of the old style pen and ink illustrations that you would have seen from this era and eras close to it, but I still very much wanted it to be mine. I wanted you to know this was my work, so I wanted to use elements that I have used in previous pen and ink illustrations, even if I was also trying to give it a little bit more of a vintage look than some of my previous work had. Another thing is that initially, when I was creating these illustrations, I wanted to just do black and white. I didn't want to have any grays in there beyond character skin tones. But as I started to work on this more and more and just kind of looked at everything, I realized, no, you know what, I do need some grays in here, I do need some tones. I'm going to keep it relatively simple, but I do need those kind of softer shadows to help create the atmospheres I want, especially because throughout the story, things do get literally and figuratively darker and darker. You know, as they start to descend into this sort of underworld-ish area, one of the big things that they're constantly commenting on is how weird the light gets. And that wasn't something I was going to be able to convey in purely black and white in the way that I wanted. So I was like, you know what? Okay, we're gonna have some more grays. I did also consider doing something with like a single accent color and making that a stretch goal in the Kickstarter to have colored illustrations in the book. But after creating 3 or 4 illustrations and playing around with that single color accent thing, I just couldn't quite find an accent color that I liked that could carry through the whole book and fit well, so I went ahead and pulled back on that idea and just stuck with the black and white and gray tones. So just adding, you know, all these final little polished details, things like that, some more, you know, contrast, all sorts of little things, and we ended up with this illustration that I really love. So thank you for watching.